iScrappers, Tom from the iScrap app. Today is Wednesday, January 30th, 2019. Like we like to do every Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we're doing our weekly report. Feel free, if you're watching us live, to report some of the prices you've had. Tell us about those blustery temperatures you have in the area. Let us know some of the things that you're doing, and feel free to ask any and all questions. We also love seeing prices that you've been getting at your local scrap yards, as well as shout outs as well. We'll try to shout you back out while we're doing these live feeds. If you're watching this after we do our live reports, thank you for tuning in and watching afterwards. We know that doing things in the middle of the day isn't always the easiest thing for so many of people that are out there working or scrapping for a living. We know that you're tuning in and we appreciate your time. Post us some of the prices, some of the pictures, some of the stories that you have about your scrap. We'd love to talk about them and expand a little further. In the last few weeks, we've been working on a few things. Of course, we always work on the prices and we try to get you the most current and updated information about the markets, where they're headed, where they've been, different news stories that are going on. Today, we're talking about a couple of other things, and we've been sharing more posts that we've been writing about different tools that you can utilize, about different types of clothes that you can utilize during this time of the year. You know, right now I'm wearing 3 or 4 different layers, and each of them for me is serving a different purpose. My base layer, my flannel, and then my shirt on top of it. Of course, I got the long johns on and the different socks and the heavier things. And we'd love to hear about different things that you're using that help you stay warm during the winter time. For those of you who are in that Midwest, bucket of freezing cold weather right now, we hope that you are watching from a very warm place and making sure that your pipes are wrapped with insulation, that you have heaters going, and that you're not getting too cold. These are the temperatures where bad things can happen, whether it's pipes freezing, people getting frostbite, machines seizing up. This is where you really have to be very careful of what you're doing. I know that at our scrapyard, we routinely maintain our equipment, especially in these cold temperatures, by putting fuel additives in, making sure that we have heaters next to all of the pipes, making sure every day we do a check and our trucks are good, always full of fuel. These little things. I know that fuel is always expensive, even though it's been cheaper lately. Having your cars full of gas is one of the most important things that you can do going into these cold stretches, not allowing any moisture to build up, and that's where some of the pipes could freeze a little bit. A couple of weeks ago at our yard, we actually had a hose freeze just because there was a little bit of moisture, and overnight when the temperatures hit 0, it ended up freezing and cracking one of the hoses, which caused us a bit of a delay the next day. We had to take it off and fix it and get one fabricated and made. So anyway, in the last week, we've seen a lot of different types of news coming out there. There hasn't been anything crazy going on with the commodities market. We have seen the copper prices jump 4 or 5 cents a pound. Our reported prices have jumped up on average a couple of cents. But one of the problems that we've seen is the market has gone up, the market has gone down. The same 5 or 6 cents over the last week. We've seen this morning we saw a 3.5 cent increase. Yesterday we saw a 2.5 cent increase. So that's great. That's 6 cents in 2 days. But what could happen tomorrow? We could come in and see a 7 or 8 cent drop, which is what we saw on Monday morning. We saw the market down 6 or 7 cents. So there's so many different pieces of news that are coming out that it's going to be very, very difficult for us to get a really great grasp on what's going on with these markets overall. We continue to watch, we continue to listen, we continue to report on what we see and hear, but sometimes going out there and feeling how the markets are reacting is a little more important. Now, we've been talking to a lot of people about the prices on steel, which has been one of the primary concerns over the last 3 or 4 months. Of course, many of us know that the tariffs were and are going to affect the non-ferrous markets, such as aluminums, coppers, and brasses, also not in the order, but known as the ABCs of scrap metal. With those markets still continuing to be on a wait and hold mode with the tariff talks and the negotiations with the Chinese continuing, we continue to hear little bits and pieces about positive pieces of news. When we are hearing good pieces of news coming out of those talks between the US and China, we tend to see the market take a big bounce. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, depending on whether the news story is positive or negative. That's one indication that we've seen over the last few weeks, and we continue to watch and pay attention to it just so we can get a really good idea about what's going on and what we can expect going forward over the next few weeks. Now, here we are about 5 weeks away, a little less, from March 1st deadline of the new tariffs being imposed on China from the US. And of course the Chinese are going to retaliate with some more tariffs of their own, but we're watching this situation and we're trying to figure out how to assess it and where we're going to go after March 1st. That's the important thing that I look at. Last year we talked about June 1st, 2019, which is only 4 months away, and now we're talking about March 1st, which is 1 month away. And these are dates that in our minds, one of them, the June date, was about a full year after the tariffs went into effect. The March date is where the US and the Chinese said that they kind of have a line in the sand drawn, and we're waiting to see what happens going forward. Now the aluminum market has continued to get hit, have the prices get beaten down, and we've seen prices on aluminum sheet dipping into the low 20s per pound. Now, a lot of people that we've been talking to online and watching different conversations happening through our Facebook group have talked about continuing to hold their material. Some people have even suggested that if scrappers of the world unite and hold their material, that would cause a supply glut, that we would start to see material really be needed at scrap yards and the scrap markets internationally, and that would cause the markets to increase. That's a very large myth, because a lot of the material that the scrap markets, the world markets rely on are heavily coming from the manufacturing industry. So as they are coming from those industries, we're waiting to see what happens with those going forward. Now we've seen different markets reacting in different ways. We've seen the Chinese market slowing down, and while they had growth in 2018, it was a much lower rate than had been over the last 20 years. Their rate of growth was still very strong, and the US also showed a very strong growth rate. And many countries throughout the world would really, really love to have the growth rates that the Chinese and the US considered slower than they would like to be seen. Now, with unemployment rates continuing to drop, with people on the job lines and people working, we've seen a lot of scrap on the road for smaller things, for light iron markets, especially because steel prices have dipped down. Now with people working, that's a positive thing. People will ask about gas prices, and we've seen the gas prices continue to fall. With the US becoming one of the world's largest exporters, not importers, exporters of oil and gas, we've seen those prices remain decreased. While we've seen a 2-cent climb over the last week and a half, we still have national prices way below where they've been over the last few years. Virginia, we have a question?
We actually have two at the same time, which are very similar to each other.
Let's answer them and go from there.
Bob asked, I have a 55-gallon drum full of heat sinks. Should I demand extruded aluminum prices only? And then Ryan, at almost right after, also asked, how can I tell what grade of aluminum heat sinks are, 60, 61, extruded, etc.?
That's very funny that both of you guys asked that. We appreciate the questions. First, I wouldn't demand anything. Anytime that a customer comes to our yard and demands a price, we kindly ask him to leave because we want to talk about things that are going to be fair for both of us. Now, aluminum extrusions can be a very generic term for clean aluminum prices. And we've seen heat sinks vary in different grades, forms, and cleanliness. Now, there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind for your heat sinks, for both of you gentlemen. Heat sinks should be free of copper, should be free of stainless, should be free of glue, should be free of the CPU chips that are attached to them. On top of that, there are different grades of heat sinks, maybe not very often, but the different grades of aluminum can vary. We've seen 6061, 5052, aluminum clips, aluminum extrusions, aluminum 6063, and a couple of other grades on top of that. Now, when you have aluminum heat sinks that are mixed with copper, you may think that those are going to be similar to an ACR, an aluminum copper radiator, out of an air conditioner. That doesn't always mean that your scrapyard is going to buy it at that price. As we've found over the years, different items are treated different ways. Now, I'd suggest asking your scrapyard how they buy it ahead of time, and most likely in person with a couple of samples before just showing up. If you have a full 55-gallon drum or garbage can of these heat sinks or a few buckets, chances are you've been accumulating those for a little while unless you're really doing a lot of electronics, and it's worth bringing a couple down there just to get some answers so you can sort and separate your material ahead of time. With the heat sinks, one very, very important thing that you're going to want to know is to make sure that your stainless heat sinks are removed from the pile. If your scrapyard starts to see those stainless heat sinks in there, you will very quickly get a deduction and a very low price on your heat sinks overall. Another question?
I have a question about that. How can you tell the difference between stainless and aluminum?
Sure, great question. Aluminum is going to be a little bit of, Virginia, can you turn that? Aluminum is going to be a little bit of a whiter color, a little more dull, and stainless is going to be a harder color and a little more silvery. Now, stainless steel heat sinks often will have copper mixed throughout them, and believe it or not, this is one of the worst items that you could sell to your scrapyard because it's a very, very tough market having stainless and copper mixed together. So use your file. If the heatsink scratch is very easy, it's going to be aluminum. If it kind of does a to it, it's probably going to be stainless steel. You'll know by comparing a couple next to each other. Feel free to post some pictures of different ones that you've been doing. Now, one post that we saw and we highlighted this week from our social media page was talking about people that are almost bragging about their different scrap loads. The one gentleman that posted, I believe his name was Steve, he said that he was going to be leaving the group because he was tired of seeing people brag or post about their other scrap loads. Now, it's great to see negative comments sometimes because it shows you what you need to do to grow and expand and change. But what I liked was all comments that were underneath, and a couple of really astute comments that were posted by scrappers made me smile. I think that people posting some of their pictures, maybe they are bragging, maybe they're just sharing, because it's very hard to talk about scrap to people who don't care about scrap. I mean, I do scrap, for a living. When I talk to my wife, very often she kind of tunes me out because when you talk about it so many years in a row, it sounds like the same thing. But when you're living the scrap life, you want to see what other people are doing. You want to see loads that they're moving. You want to see prices that they're getting. You want to see how they're putting things on the trucks, how they're putting things on the trailers, what they're separating. Are cars worth it? Are cars not worth it? Are catalytic converters worth different prices in different areas? How do we price these things out? These questions have all started to come, not from me, but from scrappers asking other scrappers after seeing loads that are posted online. So these are really important things, and we think that's a great thing by sharing your pictures. Hell yeah, you might be bragging, but who cares? Bragging is only a bad thing if other people don't want to read it or see it, and it seems like on our page, many people want to read, see, hear more and more and more scrap stories, so it's been a really positive thing for us to see. We'll pop back to the markets. The steel market has been relatively unchanged over the last few weeks, with a very flat market being seen overall. We've started to see a couple of market news items with the prices rising $7 to $15 per ton on certain grades of steel, but I don't want to put pen to paper on that yet because we only started to hear that news coming this morning. Some people have said the prices are coming. Some people have said the prices are lowering. Some people will say, well, this is all due to the cold snap that we're having with some scrapyards not being able to move as much metal, and all of these things are true in some sense. The material is still on the ground at many of these scrapyards, they just don't have the ability to move it. So in different areas of the country, you might see different prices ticking up because they have they need material, there's no excess out there, and they're really looking to pull it in. Another question?
We have a question from Russell.
Okay.
He asked, is Bear Bright more than Copper 1?
Yes, Bear Bright is always more than #1 tubing or #1 flashing or #1 bus bar. Bear Bright is the Cadillac or the the Lamborghini of the scrap metal world. Maybe we'll post a funny video or blog about comparing different scrap to different types of cars. That'd be interesting to see and have reaction. Another question?
He also asks, why is that? Why is Bear Bright more than Copper 1?
It just becomes, it has a little less of a hardener inside. And while you shoot it with an XRF, which is an analyzer that scrapyards use, Bear Bright has always been a higher grade of copper. It's easier to refine. They just know that it's more pure. When you're using something primarily in the electrical field, you need the currents to be able to run through it quicker, where a lot of #1 tubing items or flashing don't have that flexibility or easiness for material to flow through it. If you're using pipe, you have water flowing through it, so you need to make sure that they're harder, or the electrical currents going through the bare bright generally have to be a little bit higher of a grade. So it's one of those answers where I can't give you a clear-cut answer other than there's a little less of a hardener inside of it, and it is what it is. Overall, the markets have been very strong. We've seen the U.S. stock market climbing with a very solid January. We started to see some companies posting different prices and different reported earnings, and the earnings have been relatively strong for the fourth quarter of last year, or whatever quarter it is that they have on their books. So that's been good. We saw one of our favorite companies, Caterpillar, report earnings that went down and caused the stock to go down 10% the other day. But there's a lot of things that are going on, and we have a lot of different interesting pieces of news and technological advances and different things going on with these tariffs that we're going to be in a wait-and-see mode going forward for the next few weeks to see what really happens with these trade talks. What we're hoping for is a deal to be struck that is fair for both parties, that each party leaves something on the table, but at the end of the day walks away knowing that they got a deal that's going to help their country out in the long term, whether it's exporting material, importing material, or just how the trades are going to go regardless. Hopefully we start to see some of these tariffs disappear by the summertime. Guys, today is Wednesday, January 30th, 2019. This is Tom from the iScrap app. Feel free to post prices, ideas, comments, questions, anything you have about scrap metal. Until next week, stay warm, and I'll scrap you later.